The Renaissance began with the migration of Greek scholars to Italy following the fall of Constantinople in the 14th century. Aristotle's arguments concerning structural elements in drama and painting provided a springboard for the Renaissance discussion of the concept ut pictura poesis. The Greek poet Horace wrote the famous line ut pictura poesis, but before Horace there was the lyric poet Simonides of Chios who wrote, "Poetry is vocal painting as painting is silent poetry." This analogy clearly influenced the Florentine painters of the early Renaissance, Michelangelo, Raphael, Botticelli, and others. They were narrative painters, storytellers, expecting their paintings to be read. This is Raphael's School of Athens. We see the figures of Plato and Aristotle in the center, Plato pointing skyward, Aristotle pointing earthward. Plato's side, overseen by a statue of Apollo, represents artists, writers, intellectuals. On the other side are the Aristotelians, overseen by a statue of the earthy, more pragmatic Minerva. Plato and Aristotle are emblematic representatives of two complementary principles of thought. And note that the painting is triadic in design, with two side panels balancing a central focal point. This is Raphael's Disputa. Again, a story is being told, and again we find the same triadic three-panel structure. And this is Botticelli's The Story of Virginia. What better example of Simonides' words, "Poetry is vocal painting," can be imagined than these lines from the play Antony and Cleopatra? Here Caesar is describing an angry mob who he believes lack the intellect to reason logically, and so are easily influenced by others, first taking one position, then another. This common body, like to a vagabond flag upon the stream, goes to and back, lacking the varying tide to rot itself with motion. What the playwright formed was a speaking picture. As we listen, we see in our mind's eye an image the words create. Let us examine how, during the Renaissance, poetic form was conceived in spatial terms, and we will see how Renaissance thought was spatially oriented. When Edmund Spenser begins the last canto of the Faerie Queene with the words, "Now begins this goodly frame of temperance fairly to rise," he is saying that in addition to the narrative structure, a unified structure of meaning has been erected, a spatial structure like a building, which, now that the book is concluding, can be seen as a whole. Spenser outlined his projected structure for the Faerie Queene in a letter to Sir Walter Raleigh. He wrote that it would be like an elaborately organized cycle of paintings, comparable in structure to Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel paintings, with the 12 projected books devoted to the 12 private virtues, ultimately to be balanced by a second series of books devoted to the public virtues. Symmetrical triadic design can be observed in Christopher Muller's poem, Hero and Leander. The opening section of the poem is the description of Hero and Leander's first encounter. This is followed by a section that weaves a mythological tale of Mercury, the country maid, and the fates. In the third section, balancing the opening section in length, Marlowe writes of the consummation of Hero and Leander's love. The centerpiece, the mythological tale, is not the digression it might appear to be, but a demonstration of the power of love at work in the universe. It is this geometric center that provides the key to both structure and meaning. The play A Midsummer Night's Dream presents a particularly clear example of symmetrical triadic design. The play begins in the daylight world of Athens, city of reason. The middle section of the play is set in a fanciful moonlit world ruled by fairies and ends with the sun rising. The third section takes us back to Athens. It is daylight and reason again prevails. As in Hero and Leander, the first and third sections are side panels, roughly equivalent in length, running in this case 250 and 350 lines respectively. The second section, or central panel, runs 1,300 lines. The design of A Midsummer Night's Dream suggests a playwright with a strong sense of spatial form and remarkable powers of organization. Some of the plays in the canon, however, exhibit a symmetrical dyadic structure. A Winter's Tale illustrates this structure clearly. The key to the design is the character Time, who enters in the middle, dividing the play into two parts, which are roughly equal in length, the first running 1,370 lines, and the second 1,550 lines. The character Time carries an hourglass, which exactly in the middle of his speech he turns upside down. The two halves of A Winter's Tale correspond to each other in an elaborate system of parallels and contrasts. The first, or winter panel, is a tragedy in miniature. The section concludes with a symbolic recapitulation of the destructive forces in the foreground of this panel. This first panel is about death, but the comic shepherds who enter midway through the scene foreshadow the second section, the spring panel, which is about rebirth. This structural scheme is present in most of the major scenes in the canon as well. Let's consider the Battle of Towton sequence in Henry VI, Part 3. With the war between the Lancastrians and the Yorkists raging around him, the king has stopped to meditate upon the battle. The scene begins with the king remarking how, like the sea, the battle sways first in one direction, then another. Then he overhears two soldiers commiserating. One is a father who has inadvertently killed his own son in battle. The other is a son who has inadvertently killed his father. Then the king dreams of the shepherd's peaceful life. He pictures himself carving a sundial and using it to regulate every aspect of his life. So many hours must I tend my flock, so many hours must I take my rest, so many hours must I contemplate, so many hours must I sport myself, so many days my ewes have been with young, so many months ere I shall shear the fleece. So many minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, and years, passed over to the end they were created, would bring white hairs unto a quiet grave. Ah, what a life were this! How sweet! How lovely! The regulated steadiness of the life Henry envisions contrasts with the swaying of the tides of battle, fortune sweeping in one direction and then another. The shepherd's life has meaning, the soldier's does not. This central scene, set between paired battle segments, provides a key to the play's central idea. This is not an isolated instance of Shakespearean scene design. Most of the major scenes in the plays are geometrically structured and have a central dramatic arc. In Greek drama, the entire plot of a play would be comprehended in a single action. In Shakespearean drama, a number of single actions are interwoven into a plot, and such plots are sometimes further compounded into a more complex plot, the various elements of a plot scheme exhibiting mutual parallelism, harmony, or contrast. Occurring with great frequency throughout the canon are mirror scenes. These scenes don't advance the plot as today we're taught all scenes must do. For the most part, they often contribute little to a play's dramatic excitement or our understanding of the psychology of the characters. Think of the conversation between the gardeners and Richard II, the Porter episode in Macbeth, the graveyard scene in Hamlet. These scenes, however, serve a structural function. They were created to reflect issues and themes. They too provide a clue to the basic principle, the central idea of the play. The playwright consistently organized the world into binary opposites: reason, faith; order, chaos; health, disease; light, darkness; sight, blindness; life, death. He created patterns of images around conceptual opposites. Sometimes the opposed images are used to define a particular situation, like the opposition between sacrifice and butchery in connection with Caesar's murder. Sometimes these images are used as a structural device, like the opposition between light and dark in Othello, which runs through the entire play. I spoke earlier about the 6 completed books of Edmund Spenser's The Faerie Queene, how critics have noted that the books are designed symmetrically, the first 3 devoted to the private or inner life, and the last 3 devoted to the public or outer life. This form of opposition, the antithesis between the inner and outer life, the individual and the state, is a fundamental component of Shakespeare's work. We can see a progression of Shakespeare's philosophical evolution in the three Roman history plays, in which the pure ideal of the state and the outer life gradually yields to the acknowledgment of the individual and the prominence of the inner life. First, in Coriolanus, set at an early point in the line of historical development, the state is the ideal. It is the common life to which all actions must have their reference. In Coriolanus, the rights of the individual are presented as a disturbing force, negative and wrong-headed. A good deal of time separates the age of Coriolanus from the age of Julius Caesar, the subject of the second play in the trilogy. The silent progress of humanity has carried with it expansion of the individual life in Julius Caesar, where the two sides of the opposition between the outer and inner lives meet in equal terms. Caesar seeks absolute power not for himself, but in order to do for Rome itself the service he has done for the Roman Empire. Brutus, at immense cost to himself, slays a friend he loves and believes innocent in order to save the country he loves more. A sudden revolution rather than a long span of time falls between Julius Caesar and the third play in the trilogy, Antony and Cleopatra. While in Julius Caesar the two sides of Mark Antony's nature, his public and private sides, are in harmony, in Antony and Cleopatra a new force emerges which upsets the balance. That force is Cleopatra, and it is her individuality that conquers Antony. The conflict between the state and the individual is now seen to be within Antony himself. The playwright used locale to create opposition as well. The opposition of Egypt and Rome in Antony and Cleopatra is as obvious and central to the story as is the use of black and white in Othello. The staging of these plays was as markedly symmetrical as is their structure, especially in the earlier Elizabethan period. In large scenes with many actors on stage, a central figure, such as a king, was generally selected as a focal point around which the other figures would be symmetrically arranged, just as in the Italian paintings we looked at earlier. Entrances and exits tended to bring opposed characters on and off stage in balanced pairs from opposite doors, sometimes sacrificing dramatic logic in order to achieve this symmetry. In 1945, Alfred North Whitehead, English mathematician and philosopher, wrote, "Art is the imposing of pattern on experience and our aesthetic enjoyment in recognition of the pattern." I've attempted to demonstrate that Shakespeare's plays are structured symmetrically. I've attempted to demonstrate that nearly all major scenes in the plays are patterned, that the overall scheme helps to shape the various episodes within each scene into a unified composition, and that the major scenes are generally composed of a number of panels, distinguishable dramatic segments. As in a cycle of narrative paintings, we pause to absorb each scene in turn before stepping back to view the unifying principle of the play as a whole. We see that Shakespearean dramaturgy is severely controlled design in which all elements relate to an overarching idea. We hope that this lecture has provided you with a new way of viewing Shakespeare's plays, one that will enhance your enjoyment and increase your appreciation of this incomparable body of work.